everyone, and welcome back to the live stream of Politics World with Sam Scrubala. One election it's been. I don't think anyone among us expected tonight to transpire quite like it has. We're now joined by James Downs, an incoming lecturer of European and Asian politics at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, can you explain tonight?
Well, as you said, Sam, it's just astonishing when we look at the exit poll and the what's happened so far in terms of the results that have come in. It's nothing short of staggering to my mind, and the results, if confirmed, they would really mark a stunning setback for Theresa May, who had called that vote initially to strengthen her hand before the Brexit talks. But if the results remain the way they are, and the Conservatives are forecast to get 318 and fall short of that majority, then not only will she be seriously weakened, but she could be under threat of being ousted by the end of the day.
So I guess at this stage we have to be looking that neither party can really form a government, especially as the Liberal Democrats are refusing to enter another coalition. Does this mean we're headed towards another election?
I think if this scenario plays out, like you said, it could be the case that with the Lib Dems ruling themselves out, there could be no clear majority, and inevitably this could result in another election soon. So we're really in uncharted territory. And I mean, the one parallel I can think of relating to the Brexit vote last year, just there's these really wide patterns of volatility in British politics that we've seen, and I really feel that there's a very kind of new form of politics that's going on. And what I think, actually, just going a bit off topic, what I found very interesting is looking at the breakdown in Scotland, from where my family actually lives currently in Scotland, and seeing how the SNP are forecast to lose quite a few seats here, and the Scottish Conservatives seem to be gaining here. So when we look at patterns, it's there's really kind of some broad trends overall, but there's real complexity at play here.
Well, as you mentioned, the SNP are losing left, right and centre, losing possibly as much as 22 seats today, including Angus Robertson, who's already lost his seat, and possibly even Alex Salmond. Why are we seeing this swing against the SNP, and how are the Scottish Conservatives doing so well, especially when they're struggling so much in England and Wales?
Yeah, that's an excellent question to raise. And to my mind, if I had to bet on this, I would say that there's two factors at play here that explains this trend in Scotland. Firstly, I'd say that Nicola Sturgeon, I'd say kind of the tide seems to be turning against her a bit, and her party, especially how before she said that there wouldn't be another Scottish independence referendum, and she's kind of flip-flopped again, and it seems to be the case that she wants to hold another one. And it's potentially the case that the Scottish public the tide has begun to turn against her, and they may not deem her or perceive her to be as competent as she was before. And secondly, I really think we have to look at the added dynamic of Ruth Davidson. And Ruth Davidson, since she's taken over as leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, she's tried to run a very different sort of campaign, and she's seen as not only highly charismatic but able to really appeal to a number of Scottish voters. So I say that leadership effects are playing a key role here, and that potentially with Ruth Davidson as a more moderate and ideologically palatable leader, the Scottish Conservatives don't seem to be as toxic as they once were. So I think there's been this detoxification process in Scotland that's taken place. And also thirdly, a third trend, just to add very briefly, is Scottish Labour. We saw back 2 years ago at the 2015 general election, Scottish Labour they were all but really decimated in Scotland, with key leaders of the party such as Jim Murphy, Douglas Alexander, losing their seats. And I think, again, this trend seems to be continuing. But I think Ruth Davidson has really, she's doing something different that no other Scottish Conservative leader has done for a fair while. to my mind.
Well, I suppose looking now towards the Labour side, we've seen quite an astonishing rise in the polls on the part of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour. How much of this is down, do you feel, to a Corbyn surge, and how much is it down to the mistakes on the part of Theresa May and the Conservatives?
I'd say this is a really difficult one to disentangle, and potentially one that, until we see the breakdowns by different polling companies over the course of the next few days and weeks, it's kind of very difficult to decide which one is actually the key factor here. But again, to my mind, when we think about kind of these two competing factors, number one, is it this kind of Corbyn effect that we've seen, being able to engage younger voters and really engage them in this movement that he's running? Or is it secondly, some commentators are arguing that Theresa May has run a very poor campaign. We've seen her flip-flop, make a number of U-turns. We saw that most prominently with the dementia tax. And to my mind, I would say there's two factors here that are causing this. Jeremy Corbyn has clearly tapped into this kind of new generation of voters, and he's really, as we've seen, he's marked a clear departure from the New Labour years. However, whilst I think he has engaged these younger voters, and turnout does seem to be up so far amongst the younger generation, I really feel that the Theresa May, the way that the campaign's been led, is actually, to my mind, a stronger factor in seeing what we've seen so far tonight. I'd say the Conservative campaign, by contrast, has appeared stale. And also, when we're thinking about Theresa May, she seemed to perform better at the start of the campaign when she was focusing on Brexit. Once she started to go into other policy areas, it seems to be the case that Jeremy Corbyn was able to capitalise on these issues. I mean, if we look at some of his ideas, he's focused on a number of core social issues, and really he's not had much of a focus on Brexit. He's tried to put forward ideas about nationalisation, investment in the NHS, and really I'd say that Corbyn has been able to kind of reach some voters that he might not have been able to before. But as you've said, and we've been saying, it's really just an astonishing turnaround, because a month ago all the polls were forecasting the Conservative Party to have a really substantial majority of about 60 to 80 seats, and this was, Theresa May said this was going to be a very strong case to have a strong mandate for the Brexit vote. But now we're seeing that it might be the case, if the forecast projections continue throughout the night, that Theresa May has really miscalculated and she's gambled on this election.
Well, going forward, as you mentioned, Theresa May, something of a gamble at this election. It was meant to be to solidify her Brexit hand and to establish what direction the country wanted to go in vis-a-vis Brexit. Yet in the end, the issue was secondary in the campaign at best. What do you think are going to be the consequences of this, of Brexit not really being discussed at the election, and especially if we can't form a government with negotiations meant to begin in just 10 days' time?
That's a very valid point that you raise, and it's really going to put the EU talks into jeopardy if this forecast does play out and the Conservatives don't have a majority, because we'll be looking at, potentially that there's been kind of rumours online that if this does go ahead, then Theresa May could potentially be tapped on the back and replaced by someone such as Boris Johnson. Of course, at the moment, this is all conjecture and hypothetical, but it could take place. And in regards to the Brexit talks, I think this really does put them, in jeopardy. I mean, we really are facing uncertain times here, and it might be the case that another election will have to be called shortly after to then try and get these Brexit negotiations back on. There was an interesting interview that I saw earlier on the BBC with Nigel Farage, and Farage, leader of the United Kingdom Independence Party, and Farage actually said that he wouldn't rule out there potentially being a second referendum if these election results are going to take place. But you also mentioned a very prescient point about Brexit, and that during the campaign, again, when we're looking at, there were other key issues that came to the fore about the NHS, and really, again, I think Corbyn was able to really use these issues to try and show that, Theresa May, a lot of her strategy seems to have been solely focused on Brexit, and quite clearly, when she began to look at issues such as the dementia tax, it was clear that these policies were not really very effectively costed, and this played into Corbyn's hands. But again, to answer the question more directly in regards to the Brexit negotiations, it's really uncertain about what will happen. I mean, what we might think might happen is that the hard Brexit route might not go forward now if the Conservative Party doesn't have an outright majority. So that may potentially give hope to Liberal Democrat supporters and also Labour supporters here.
Well, speaking of Brexit, obviously the party of Brexit will largely seen as being UKIP. Now, tonight, their leader, Paul Nuttall, all but irrelevant in his race in Skegness. Does this mark the end of the UKIP project?
I'd say that the UKIP project is towards its end now. I'd say that UKIP have had their day. I mean, there's this long, or kind of this nice quote by the former diplomat, the former historian Richard Hofstadter, who said far-right parties, radical right parties are like bees. Once they sting, they die. And if we look at UKIP and what they were able to do, they were able to tap into what scholars such as Professor Matthew Goodwin have argued, that left behind voters in society. However, with the Brexit vote last year, we saw that UKIP were able to take a lot of former disaffected voters away from the Labour Party, these kind of discontent working class voters. However, we might argue that actually the Brexit vote was where they reached their high point, UKIP did, and that the public potentially after that realised that UKIP was potentially just a single issue party in their hard Euroscepticism. And my argument now would be that UKIP have had their day. In a sense, Theresa May was able to really restrict their issue space on issues such as immigration in the last few months. And secondly, I would argue that a lot of UKIP's movement was really led by Nigel Farage. Whether you like him or not, he's a very populist, charismatic leader, much more charismatic and competent, a lot of commentators would say, compared to Paul Nuttall. And building on that point, thirdly, it's clear that Labour tonight, if the projections continue, especially in the north of England, the Labour Party have been able to potentially win back some of these voters away from UKIP. So I would say it's not the complete end of UKIP, but I would say that UKIP have had their day, and it's going to be extremely difficult for the party to recover from this. So there are kind of these three different factors at play. And again, like we've seen with a lot of radical right parties when we look across Europe, especially if we look at the Front National in France, even Geert Wilders' party in the Netherlands, these types of parties are not only niche, but they really are driven by these populist, charismatic leaders that really play a strong role. And clearly, we've seen in a number of interviews that Nuttall has, he's nowhere near in terms of his performance compared to Farage, and he's had a lot of policy blunders as well. So really, I think that this might not be the complete end of UKIP at this election, but I don't think they're going to recover from this in the longer term.
Final question now. Looking forward, by the end of the night, when the dust is settled and everything's said and done, what combination, if not a majority government, do you see the UK having, and will we require a second election?
So again, that's a good and also a very difficult question to answer currently. And we've seen the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron earlier tonight, ruled out any coalition taking place. So I feel that if the Conservatives fall short of the majority, then I think it's unlikely that Labour and the SNP could come together to form a working government. And the most likely situation, to my mind, would therefore be another election in the coming months. I think that's the most likely scenario. I can't see the Liberal Democrats. I mean, Farron said that they wouldn't take part in the coalition at the beginning of the night, but again, I'm not sure if I can see the party potentially being able to agree to a coalition with Labour and the Scottish Nationalist Party. So based on the current projections and forecasts, if the Conservatives do not win a outright majority, which looks likely at the moment, then I think that another election could be on the horizon.
Well, there we have it. Possibly another election after all this campaigning. Yet again. James Downs, thank you for joining us on today's show.
Thank you.